first time attending an event in the library? Oh, wow. Awesome. Oh, well, welcome. I love when we have events in the library. I love that we're able to do this. It's, I feel, the heart of PRS. It's a magical place. It's a vibe, for sure. So I love that we're able to have events like this in here. Just want to share a little bit about this space. PRS was founded in 1934 by Manly P. Hall, and in 1935, October 17th, 1935 to be exact, about 100 people gathered on this land to break ground on this building and also our bookstore. I think the building opened sometime in 1936, and so we have the library and the bookstore. They're the two oldest buildings on our campus. Back in the day, the bookstore also had a printing press in it, and Manly P. Hall produced all of his books and lectures here. So if you find an old edition of one of his books or lectures, it will say, printed, published at the Philosophical Research Society, 39 Time West Willies, because it was actually produced on site here. So no printing press these days. That space is like a warehouse space now. But the bookstore is still there, and obviously the library is still here and going strong. If you want to come back and spend more time in the library, it's open Thursdays and Fridays from noon to 6. It's a research library, so you can't check books out, but you can come and pull up to 3 books at a time. We have a librarian on staff. They'll pull the books for you, and yeah, you can just spend some time in this beautiful, magical space and spend some time reading and enjoying it. So that's a little bit about the space. We have a very full event schedule going on these days. We have about 40 to 50 events happening every month. Lectures, conversations like the one happening tonight, but also film screenings, performances. We have several meetups going on, book groups. So there's a lot happening here these days. This place is very much alive, and we hope that you will join us again in the future. So if you'd like to check out our schedule, everything is online at prs.org. And so yeah, that's just a little bit about PRS, about the space that you're in this evening. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest this evening. Marcella is a renowned artist, intuitive, and spiritual teacher with over 25 years of experience. Her mystical artwork has been exhibited nationwide, and her works are held in the permanent collection of the Rhode Island School of Design Museum. Marcella has taught tarot for teens at the Los Angeles Public Library and now leads workshops and healing circles worldwide. She's the author of Healing the Liminal, the creator of several celebrated tarot and oracle decks, and the co-author of Tarot in the Library of Esoterica series by Tashin. Marcella's work blends art, divination, and spirituality, inspiring people to transform their lives and reclaim their multidimensional identities. Known online as JK Ultra, Jennifer Carmody is a leading voice in digital spirituality, metaphysics, and extraterrestrial phenomena. With a following over 500,000, she's become an influential figure in the exploration of the unseen and metaphysical realms. Her expertise in hypnosis and her ability to break down complex topics into accessible insights empowers her audience to explore their soul's journey and unlock hidden dimensions of existence. Jen's engaging content and energetic approach make her a powerful guide in the realm of personal and spiritual growth. So without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Marcella Kroll.
Hi.
Hello, welcome. It's super exciting to be here. I feel like we are doing an event in the Akashic Records right now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So it feels super special. Also, what a manifestation to be here. This is, what an incredible place. It's such an activator. And we're here to celebrate the launch of your book, Healing the Liminal, which is many different things, and it's actually, I feel like, the most personal that your work has gotten, where we really get to see beyond the decks, beyond the art, and get to hear more about you and your story.
Yeah, and I also just want to say I'm really so happy to be here. PRS is a really important place in my history. I used to come to the president's class years ago, and I've taught here, and I would just come hang out here a lot when I lived in Los Angeles, so it's nice to kind of come home and share this project, which is so personal in such a vibey place, surrounded by all of this wisdom and knowledge, and to do it amongst friends. So I feel really good about that. we were kind of joking because we saw each other last night, but I was like, did we prepare? No. But do we need to? No.
No.
I feel like we have we kind of let it flow, and
Right.
yeah, I think it's kind of wild to see that this book in a physical form. It is a collection of, yes, on some levels, instruction on how to connect, into your own lineages and your practices, especially if you feel disconnected or like you don't have a formal path. But also, there's very personal channeled mediumship stories that I shared from my mediumship practice, where I went into a mediumship state to channel my ancestors, or an altered state to channel more like other realms, and then shared personal relations to those things on top of it. So yeah, it was a lot. And someone asked, how did you, as I've been going through this book tour, like, how did you deal with like all these things coming up? I said a lot of therapy and QHHT with Jen that I did helped me significantly in kind of just processing everything that would come up around it. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. That was really awesome too, because we did want to find out where you were going to move. And it was funny, in the QHHT, we asked your higher self under hypnosis, and the answer was, it's somewhere that you're not thinking yet.
Yeah.
And it wasn't.
Yeah.
And now you're in Tucson and
Yes.
living your best life. But also, this book had its origin actually in Egypt, right?
Yeah, well, so it started off a couple of years ago, actually during kind of COVID pandemic. I came up with it as a class, and then it evolved into a book. And my publisher was like, "What are you working on?" And I told them about the class, and I told them that, and they said, "Well, do you want to make it into a book?" I was like, "Sure," and I said yes without really understanding what that process looked like. And 10 months had gone by, and I couldn't write, and I was really stressed out because I was like, "Oh my God, I have to deliver a manuscript soon, and I have nothing." And I knew I had this trip to Egypt, this pilgrimage to Egypt coming up with Egyptian initiations, magical initiations. And in my head, I knew, I was like, I'm not going to be able to write till I come back from Egypt. But I was there for a month, approximately a month, and sailing on the Nile for 4 days. And the first story came when I was on the Nile. And it was a moment where I was just getting into kind of like a trance state, listening to the sounds of the Nile. And I started recording myself telling the story, because I knew if I wrote it down, I would forget, or I would start to try to edit, and so I was like, okay, just turn the camera on. And out came all of these pieces of a story. And in that moment, I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to write these stories. So it was pretty magical in that way. But then I got home, and I was on that kind of different time zone. So I'd be waking up at like 3 or 4 a.m. and just saying, okay, who are we talking to today? And recording myself. Or I would go, there was like a kind of coffee shop area, and I'd go there and I would just kind of like zone out and channel writing. But it's interesting because people are like, oh, how long did it take you? I'm like, well, I mean, to get it all out didn't take me that long. It was like 51 days, like 50,000 words in 51 days, which seems insane, but it was like months and months and years of buildup and trying to pull these things from the ethers and crossing timelines and talking to my younger self, and it was exhausting. Yeah, so it was a pretty powerful process. I definitely think Egypt unlocked a lot of things for me, memories, So there's stories, yes, ancestors, but there's also a section called Blurred Timelines, which is past lives, parallel lives, lives between lives, or places as entities. And because there's so many Los Angeles connections, there's definitely some places you'll know what I'm talking about when you're seeing the descriptions, like there's a story in the back called Before They Were Swans, and that's about Echo Park Lake. And it's Echo Park Lake as a living entity because it was so integral to my living here. There's another story called Protected by Angels, Respected by Demons, and there's Hollywood is all over it, like in terms of like backdrop. So there's a lot of familiar places, I think, for people in the room, you know, so you might find maybe looking at some of these places in a new way, like their own spirits, their own energies that are attached to them, and they're not just backdrops, but they have their own stories to tell.
I love that. And so let's get a little into like the liminal, because your approach to liminal is, I really love, is like a couple steps beyond what we often hear about the liminal space. Like sometimes people see it as like a void or a dream space, but for you, you've also brought it to living in liminal spaces and being in a liminal space with your identity. So can you talk a little bit about how like you evolved this idea of like liminal spaces?
Well, I think it's just when you feel like you're always floating like in between places and not able to be like categorized, but on every level. So for me, there's so many kind of like nooks of that. I'm multiracial. So there's like this, you're this, but you're not enough of that. You're not enough of, you know, there's this like floating between spaces, you know, in terms of like lineage, right? There's my near-death experiences, which you know, and then finding out like mediumship. So you're neither here, there, or anywhere really. So you're constantly in the in-between. I think when you have a mediumship connection or a near-death experience as a person, you're never fully here again, and you're never fully gone either. And then there's also, you know, being on the autism spectrum and that being a liminal space. And seeing the things in, you know, the contrast and not just the things that are formed, or like noticing the patterns and the waves. And I think there's so many people that live liminally and don't know where they belong, and they can feel very confused at times. But also those are the people I think that a lot of people lean on the most. I see it with a lot of people I know that are kind of these edge walkers, or people that people go, I'm going to lean into you because you can hold the weight or bend and flow with the wind. So it's kind of like offering it to anyone who feels like it's different. It's just like not being like, I'm here, but I don't want to just be haunting this space. I still exist. So it's like kind of creating space when there is no space, you know?
I love that. And really, like, when we had talked about this as, you know, you were developing it, and then it really was interesting because kind of my interpretation of liminal spaces was kind of like, you know, these in-between dream spaces and things like that. And then when you started to talk about that, I was like, wow, like there's actually so many people that are already living in liminal space in their day-to-day life.
Yeah. And I think there's more and more, we just didn't have the language or the words for it, or, you know, you kind of try to conform to fit into something and abandon these other parts of yourself. And I think that's the beauty of the liminal too, is like not abandoning, but also not letting anyone tell you that you're confused by it either. Because that was a lot of things growing up, was people would be like, you're confused. And I'm like, I'm not confused. Why am I feeling so resistant to telling me I'm confused? I don't think I'm confused. I just don't understand it fully yet, you know? So, and I think also too, even the ET stuff and the galactic connections, it's also liminal. Like, music can be liminal. Like, think about the transcendence of art or music and where it takes you, or it brings you into an altered place, so.
And what do you think about collective liminal space? Because then also the collective is kind of there as well. We're in this, in between the old world and this new world that we're creating, and it seems like humanity right now is in a liminal space.
I think there's a lot of humanity that's in kind of a liminal space. There's definitely a good portion of humanity that's not in a liminal space. And I think that's going to feel I think that's probably why it's also, excuse me, I lost my voice and it keeps going in and out. I think it's going to feel like that for a while. I think it's going to feel, a lot of people got their realities kind of shattered. And it keeps happening, right? People keep getting woken up. And I think it's just, there's going to be more and more people that identify with like, I don't know where I'm supposed to be or how to be, or just, it's just going to become more common. And I don't know the trajectory of it. It could be 10 years, it could be 5, it could be 20. But I think just as humanity is going through a liminal space right now as we shift to the next thing, you know, so I think it could be feeling like that for a while. And especially, you know, again, just to bring it back to like kind of more of an identity thing, like when you feel like your history has been lost, stolen, or suppressed, you know, there is a feeling of like I either abandon myself and conform, or I try to like paddle my way back. And I think we're going through that right now, whether we're conscious of it or not, even like whatever, like with everything that's going on, but then even with the internet and deep fakes and all that stuff, like there's so much to be said about following the flow of the liminal into the nothing, but not being afraid of it, being kind of more excited by it.
And so I love your perspectives on the internet. I always ask you about it because I think that you have just a unique perspective. You do also kind of talk about it in like the internet kind of being like a haunted place.
I think the internet's so haunted. Isn't it? It's haunted. There's ghosts. I mean, think about all the people who've passed and their profiles are still up. There's old forms of self, old identities, like things that just get abandoned into the ethers. And also, I was actually talking about this with someone earlier about how, it's not just like harmless interactions anymore. Like entities and things attach on to things. And even if you think you're just having a conversation through a DM, like there are things that can come through. And that's why I started teaching like psychic self-defense, but like particularly in the digital age, like talking about like you can't just do like your protection magic like at home with a candle. Like you need to do it online. Like you need to cleanse and purify and your spiritual hygiene online as well, because there's so much stuff just floating around. And they come through, it's portals, you know? So yeah, I definitely think the internet is super haunted. And we're gonna find like nooks and crannies and old rooms, or like when are they gonna revive? I guarantee you, at some point they'll like, I know they tried to revive like MySpace, but like don't you think they're gonna just like revive these old websites? They didn't just go nowhere. Like they're all sitting in a dark room waiting to be like lit up again, and then we can find these old versions of self even. I don't know, it's just, I keep thinking like that's probably gonna happen one day.
Right, and
you know?
Those old versions of ourselves do exist on
That's what I'm
MySpace
saying. Yeah.
still.
I know, I'm like thinking about all the times I like had to pick out the perfect song and your top 5 and like the stupid quotes, and I'm like, oh God, I don't want to see her again. She exists. Like, you know, so yeah, that's a liminal space.
And so, you know, also with like things like parts work and things like that.
Oh, right.
But what about that happening in the internet world as well? So like, you know, the parts work where we're like fractalizing parts of ourselves to different moments of our life. But that's also happening in like a digital way as well, where different versions of ourselves are living, you know, sometimes we have an old profile, sometimes we kind of compartmentalize different parts of ourselves to different websites or different things like that. So like, what do you think about a lot of this stuff kind of coming into the digital age?
Well, it's interesting because, you know, also with like Instagram, you can archive, like you can request a backload archive of everything you've ever posted, and you can get it sent to you. And I did that, and it was really trippy. I don't know what I think of it. In the sense of, I don't think of it as good or bad. I think it just is. I think what could be problematic with it is our attachment to it energetically, or maybe the way we will weaponize ourselves with it, you know? So like one of the things, like there's an exercise in the book where there's like writing letters to your younger self, or like sending healing down the timeline to your younger self. And this is very liminal thinking too. Like one of the things, like I think that when I was younger, I made some decisions that, looking back, like I did not have the brain capacity, the intelligence to make those decisions. But I think it was me reaching out from now, me reaching out as an adult, sending that down my altar, down that timeline, like, hey, do this for yourself, you know, like setting myself the courage or the support, because I wasn't getting it as a kid growing up. Because I see people like my sister or like other people like that don't do any of this work. And we've made very different choices. But I really think it's my future self sending myself energy down that way. And that's why I say too, with like, there's exercises in here to send healing to your ancestors, even if you don't know them, you know, and ways to do that. And I really think that's how, like, I didn't know who my biological father was until I was 42. I tried all the kind of conventional ways you would go about it. Nothing worked. You know, it worked. Magic. Magic worked. Magic and practicality and my creativity. I was like, I'm going to do this. And send out my feelers. And then people started popping up. And because they hear us. And yeah, and I think it's also about not believing in that like lateral timeline, like you can time travel essentially.
And so you brought up ancestors, and one thing that I love in the book is that you talk about unwell ancestors, yes. And it's something that I've never heard anyone else talk about. So can you talk a little bit about that, and then also what people should do in those experiences, because we all have unwell ancestors.
Yeah, I mean, we have our elevated ancestors, we have our unwell ancestors. We all have, I think there's a romanticism with ancestor work where we kind of put them up on pedestals like gods and deities, and we're not supposed to worship them, you know, because they're not all good people, you know. And then some of the ones who like historically may have supposed to be the good people, they're actually they're jerks, or they weren't very nice, or they've done harmful things. And we don't walk around beating ourselves up for it, but we do our best to kind of make sure that we are a good ancestor moving forward. I will say there is a story in the book called The Dragon about a great-grandfather of mine who was an asshole, but there were a lot of things that made him that way. It doesn't excuse him, but I remember a couple of times actually in LA, I had a couple of different mediums that would be like, you need to banish him. You need to get rid of him. And it never felt right. It never felt right. And I should probably just read the story.
Let's go for it.
Should I just read the story? So, because again, it's about remembering the layers and the complexity, but what I did for him instead, right? It wasn't forgiving him. It wasn't pretending like, oh, you're all good. I'll just read the story.
Beautiful.
Okay. I just have to find the story. That was the other thing. What are you going to read tonight? I have no idea. Some of the stories are really short, and then some of them are a little longer. Some of them are heavy, and some of them are bittersweet. This one is called The Dragon, and I did all the artwork in it. Okay. Hopefully my voice isn't too raspy, but you can hear me okay. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Arthur was often told he was a lot, too loud, too intense, too angry, too emotional, too quiet, just too damn much. He did not know he was a dragon in human form. He was much too large to be contained in such a small body. He was filled with magic. He could make things happen almost instantaneously with his imagination. Imagine living your life one way, visible on the outside, but feeling something different inside. Perhaps this contradiction was why he was constantly hurting others with his words, his outsized reactions, his unmanageable strength. It was usually unintentional. However, the wounds he had inflicted by rejection and discomfort got the best of him as he got older. His anger often turned to implacable rage. In his childhood, he was picked on by his father and his older siblings. When he could not receive love or encouragement for his abilities, he felt resentment and threw tantrums. His mother would scold him and tell him to man up, as she didn't have time for coddling and the pain would grow. During his early adolescence, the only remedy for Arthur was to escape. He found it in music, jazz, and more specifically, Algiers jazz. He could not feel any discomfort while listening. The knots in his heart would just dissolve and melt away. Music had the medicine he needed. It was as healing as the touch of a woman, but music never told him he was too much or not enough. He daydreamed that he would open his own jazz club when he got old enough, a place where everyone who felt orphaned by God or their families could come and let the music heal them. First, he would have to ensure he lived long enough to see that through, though. It's challenging enough being a dragon, but being an Afro-Indigenous man in the 1930s was bullshit. You may have had wisdom, you may have kept your power and your freedom, but you'd still be treated like dirt under someone else's shoe. He saw it daily at his father's furniture store. He would make him furious to see his father's pride in having a business, all while his customers talked down to him. How could he possibly be proud after the government documented the whole family as colored when they were so proud to be Indigenous? Apparently they weren't Indian enough. They weren't welcome in those communities either, and it was easier to pass in those days by whatever the census called you than fight the bureaucracy and the politics of the government. Arthur could not abide by it. He also could not understand the sacrifices his parents made to raise 11 children. All he saw was the disrespect and erasure of their culture as they tried desperately to make it in a white man's world. He wasn't quiet about it either, which often got him into trouble. As he got older, he got more disgusted with the fake politeness of the people around him, feigning kindness while their disrespect was apparent. He had a reputation for being a hothead, impulsive, and a ladies' man. And yet, his ability to manifest was unmatched, even off the charts. His dragon-sized imagination still worked without fail into adulthood, and he could still make things happen so quickly that people believed in his power. But he was often too impatient to deal with the complexities of having manners, and he resisted any rules that presumed to keep him in check. So Arthur said fuck it to the family business and found other means to get by. Usually they were illegal and often involved petty theft. But what started out small grew over time. The crimes began to escalate to burglary, robbery, and selling stolen property. There were times when he saw no harm in taking from the more fortunate, justifying it to himself by saying that he was simply trying to survive. He didn't like doing time, but he didn't mind going to jail for a few months if necessary. Sure enough, he'd be out in no time and even get a little more respect for being incarcerated. After spending a few stints in the joint, he finally saved enough cash to go in on his first nightclub. Finally, he had it, the place he had dreamed of, which could offer a respite from this hostile world. He found a business partner, an investor, and the only white man he trusted, no small feat, who was in this neighborhood a black sheep of the family. The club was the spot they would take and claim as their own. Jazz and cigar smoke filled the air, and the sweet smell of whiskey and perfumed women made all of Arthur's senses stand at attention. This moment was freedom, and this is what peace for his fiery spirit looked and felt like. He was smart. He was on top of the world, and nothing could stop him. But Lord, oh Lord, did he lose all sense when a pretty woman was around. Not only did Mabel capture his attention with her looks, but the faraway feeling in her large, sad eyes was something he recognized, a pain he felt without being struck. It was more than familiar. It felt like home. Mabel was wild and free, not bound by the constructs of society. She lost her mother Sadie at a young age and never knew who her father was. She was not only independent, but she could not be controlled. She walked between the realms of the physical and the spiritual, and Arthur was a beacon in the darkness she felt she was constantly navigating, a knight in a shining suit, smelling of cigarettes and intrigue. She wasn't afraid of him or his fire. If anything, she was drawn to him, his magic, prowess, and power. It was like for the first time, the awe-inspiring in each of them was revealed, and neither was intimidated or turned away from it. Arthur's larger-than-life energy made her feel seen, like anything was possible. They fell in lust at first sight and slipped into a fantasy so fast they would forget it was still illegal for interracial marriages to exist. They found a new reality awaiting them not more than 6 short months after falling for each other. Mabel was only 17 then, and she was punished for her actions by being sent to an asylum. She was pregnant with Arthur's child and had visions of the dead. Her guardians were convinced she was possessed by the devil, and they would not stand for it. They sent her away immediately to have the baby alone in a home for wayward girls. Arthur was not allowed to be a part of her life at this time, and during those months, he forgot he was capable of being faithful. He escaped reality again by drowning himself in drink and running around with multiple women. It was sad, but even more tragic for the baby who was left in the asylum and designated as an inmate at birth. We would hope that this love story had a happy ending and that our dragon found a way to rescue his love and raise their baby, but fairy tales are just that. Reeling from the loss of this connection in his life and thrust back into a society that starved him of human empathy, the wounded dragon could not even begin to work through the tidal waves of emotions he was feeling. It wasn't appropriate during those days for a man, let alone a person of color, to express his feelings or to show his vulnerability. He had to hide what he felt, and he became consumed by rage, anger, confusion, and abandonment. He felt betrayed by the very acts of love that once gave him a reason to enjoy life. Arthur blew up everything around him, and nothing remained but the ashes of what once brought him joy. In a full-blown fire-breathing meltdown, he set the world ablaze and burned down just about every bridge. He drank himself into a stupor over a few months and began behaving like a demon possessed him. He had no remorse, no care, no shred of empathy. All he had left was fire and rage. Arthur went into exile, back to the cave of his apartment on the other side of the river, past the railroad tracks. At first, his friends, family, and business partners sympathized. But after their attempts only resulted in more blow-ups, no one dared to venture back for fear of meeting his wrath. Not even his beloved Mabel could reach him. After she was released from the asylum, she tried, but he was too far gone. She gave up, her heart broken and confused. Mabel abandoned all she had known, leaving their child with a guardian while she ran away to start a new life in a new state. Over the years, Arthur became more set in his ways. He was sinister and abusive, spending many nights running on fumes and booze, sleeping with many women, being volatile. He fathered another baby, and there were rumors of its death at his hand. Arthur was a hateful person with a gigantic presence, a monster. If only he had been taken care of. If only his power had been fostered for good. Now, Arthur was a son of a bitch, and this tale is not meant to put some romanticized spin on his horrific behavior. He was an abusive prick who did a lot of damage. But this story is here to tell you about what happens to dragons when you don't care for them. When you don't engage with them or show them what love is, dragons become malevolent creatures. A dragon who is loved, respected, and understood by those around him is mercy embodied. So is it nature or nurture that makes them a monster? I say it's both. We can't help but wonder what would have happened to Arthur had he been accepted, if the world had celebrated all of his magic and allowed him to embody that power. How would he have grown if he had learned to wield that fire to create tools and a life worth living instead of a destructive force? But the odds were stacked against him. But what would have happened in a better world? Here's the thing, though. Dragons don't just get born once. They exist in lineages. Every so often, another one comes along. Every time it is born, a dragon will come to know themselves and their power as the curse breaker of their lineage. You see, Arthur was my great-grandfather. And there have been times when I've met with mediums and psychics. They told me to banish him, bind him, cleanse myself of his bad karma. While he has a lengthy list of shortcomings, I am aware of the atrocities that he has committed. There's something I recognize in him that I see in myself. He still haunts me. I smell the smoke of his cigarettes. I I feel his presence invade my space when certain types of music come on. I feel what made him alive and happy to exist. I also know what happens when you are deeply misunderstood and constantly blamed for holding too much energy. When people are scared of you because of what you are capable of. I know the way others try to kill your spirit before you grow up and eat it. It's similar to how humans are obsessed with owning wild creatures and can't understand why they attack when they grow up. As Arthur's descendant, I didn't want to punish him or banish him from my mind. I wanted to free him, maybe selfishly, take on this task because I no longer wanted to be burdened with his karmic debt or the residual damage of his actions. More important though, I wanted to liberate him because his spirit was negatively trapped and almost bound energetically to his relatives by haunting them through inherited trauma, anger issues, resentment, and pain. All of the wounds he never dealt with or took accountability for, he passed down to his descendants, causing them to continue to wreak havoc in the lives of his living relatives. I wanted to give him one last chance to be seen as a dragon, freed from his mortal human form. So instead of banishing him, I made him a meal, a spirit meal I felt he would like. I sat down on the floor of my studio apartment, as I didn't have a kitchen table at the time, and arranged 2 settings, plate to plate, cup to cup. I set the table and invited him in, not with unconditional love, but with recognition. No one, not since Mabel, had treated him with decency. Why would they? He set it up that way as a means to punish himself. We ate. I thanked him for bestowing this dragon energy on me, and I opened the pathway through the ethers for him to go. In front of my eyes, he morphed into a golden dragon and went out through the back door, making his way through the sagebrush and up the yucca tree towards the sky, until I could see him no more. He left that day, and not a year later, I got my baby dragon in real life, the bearded dragon I call Lord. Over the years, I found many ways to express my dragon energy through performance. I had a few bumps and lessons in the road as I learned how to control my temper when others tried to moderate my size. I was fortunate enough to play in bands a few times in my life. And on one show night, one of those bands got to play the stage in the club Arthur formerly owned. Ironically, I only found that out 17 years after the fact. Arthur had been trying to connect with me for years, and I was so engulfed in my rage that I could not hear him. I still sense my great-grandfather's energy occasionally. He is fiercely protective and respects and loves my artistic life. And while all cannot be forgiven for the pain or the wreckage he has caused, it is no longer my job to carry his burden. The task is on him now to rectify. It is no one's responsibility. No more descendants will be burdened with maintaining the shame of what he has done. As the next dragon in the lineage, it's my responsibility to control my fire and learn how to use it to create tools of love, peace, and healing, to manifest a great life, one that he did not have the opportunity to have. It is my responsibility to be my ancestors' wildest dream.
Thank you so much for reading that. That's so beautiful. And what a great way to honor yourself, your lineage, him, and also to give that advice to people, because we all have these stories that we've heard from our grandparents and things where, there was a lot of abusive behavior happening. And, so it gives people ideas of something that they can do to honor those people in a way that, doesn't wash away everything that they've done, but to treat them the way that they were not able to be treated here.
Absolutely. And I also say, trust your gut, because the amount of times that people told me to banish him, I felt like I would be banishing a part of myself. But my intuition was like, that's not the answer. That's not the way to do it. You don't just throw people away. We don't throw people away. I'm very emotional right now because it's been crazy reading parts of this book out loud in front of people after not looking at it. You know, I like wrote it and then I was like, okay, I can't look at this. But like feeling them come through me. And that was like another experience that was really surreal, was like feeling multiple voices like come through me. So it's a trip. But yeah, it's pretty wild. But yeah, so I hope that these, you know, stories can help you find connection or ways to honor the discomfort or the uncomfortable parts, not just celebrate the good stuff. Because yeah, I don't know. I don't believe, I've talked about this with you before. I don't believe in family curses. I think family curses, my vision of them is they're shadows, and it's shadow work. And it's basically, if you have enough people in a lineage that aren't doing their work, it turns into its own like egregore entity, and it's basically, it's not a curse, it's a thing that's following you around until you deal with it. But I think there's a lot of people now that are dealing with a lot of that stuff. You know, people who are, you know, you're here, you're seekers, you're not it's not that you're not afraid, but maybe you're just tired of, you know, carrying around all this weight, so.
And I love this approach too, because like you said, there's so many practitioners that say like, banish it, do a cleansing, and even like parts of the self, you know, they're like, oh, there's a negative attachment on you, there's a demon, there's all of these things. And most times these are either part of your own shadow that is
right.
asking for attention, part of an ancestral shadow. And so it's, and also what I was thinking about when you were reading it, one of my favorite books is this book called Grendel, and it's from the perspective of the monster from Beowulf. And so Beowulf is like one of like the oldest forms, it was like the oldest piece of literature written in English. And in the 70s, they wrote a book that was from the perspective of Grendel. And he doesn't know he's a monster until he goes into town, and everybody's like, oh my God, what a hideous, disgusting monster.
Right.
And at first he's hurt, but then he plays into that more and more.
Right.
And because that's his identity, and that's the only way that he's ever been viewed by people. And with that being from kind of the perspective of the dragon, a lot of fairy tales are about slaying the dragon.
Right.
And it's like, this is almost like the dragon's story of like kind of how it becomes the monster in the story.
Yeah. And like all of these gifts that he had, his manifesting ability, his ability to like dream so big, and everyone trying to make him small, you know, or make him quiet and invisible, like be seen but not heard, like that kind of thing. And that is a true story. My old band played on the stage of, obviously it was different. It was like a different type of club. It was like a rock club at that time, but it was the bones of this club that he had owned where he met my great-grandmother. Wow. And she had lost her mother and was in foster care, and she was like partying and like wild, and she saw things, and so finding out, and then, you know, and then my grandmother, the daughter, again, I didn't know any of this until 42. I actually have the papers from a cousin who had found letters from the guardian who took, the same woman who took my great-grandmother and took in my grandmother because my great-grandmother left her, and it says infant inmate on the paperwork. Wow. And she ended up being a tarot reader, which I had no connection to, like, growing up. But she was a tarot reader at Woodstock, and she worked in a morgue and, like, did what she could to get by. And I know, it was just kind of a trip to find out, like, also, like, that it's inherited in a way, you know, because I didn't grow up with anyone encouraging me to, like, I was with my Italian Catholic grandmother a lot. She was not encouraging me to, like, get into witchcraft. She was like, "Get find a nice Italian boy, be an accountant," you know, like that kind of thing. So you're into all this weird stuff. But at the same time, that side of the family is also into weird stuff, you know, Italian superstition, and there's stuff in there about that too. Just like malokia and like little traditions, but which is pretty cool.
And it's amazing how you've also been able to kind of, not exactly a curse, but kind of break the cycle of, you know, being told to be smaller, to be quiet. It's like, you know, you do your art, this is your book, you do music, you do really like all forms of expression. So it's like all of your different ancestors and probably many more throughout your lineage that you're unaware of,
Yeah.
you're living their dream.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things is like a lot of them, I think I had someone tell me that too, is like, that's why I say like, be a good ancestor. Like, I am fully aware of the privilege that I have, that I can express myself in ways that they had to abandon. And I think it only fuels me to do it more because they couldn't tell their stories. They had to assimilate or accommodate, you know? And then particularly like going back and like through even just like learning, there's like a language reclamation project for the Wampanoag tribe. So like even like learning simple words or learning food. One of the ways I always say to connect to your ancestors is what foods did they eat? What languages did they speak? What scents did they smell? You know, like you don't have to go and live exactly, but you can make contact by finding that connection in those ways.
And I think, you know, for everybody here as well, you know, there's probably ancestors and family members that you're living their dream right now, not realizing because we don't know about them. We don't know what their stories are or what their dreams were.
Yeah. Absolutely. How are we on time? I just like want to make sure
I don't even know what time we have till.
8.
Okay,
Is there
yeah.
anything-
Do you want to read another?
Well, so maybe we can like take a couple of questions. You know, if anybody has any questions, I can definitely read another story. Like I have a couple of like, you know, favorites, I guess.
Okay, maybe we'll end with that. See if anyone has any questions.
Yeah. Is anyone in the back?
I just wonder if you'd say more about that, the edge walking and the feeling of not having a place.
Yeah.
Sometimes that feels like a curse, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And if there's a way, I don't know, is it the right direction to be trying to find one's way in, or is there more embrace of standing on the outside?
I think it's also about like finding other, like if you look at it from like a tarot perspective, right? If we look at the hermit, it's not about being in the middle of the pack, but it's like finding other hermits, right? Like creating pathways and being someone that can create spaces, that hold spaces with other liminal beings, other people, like letting each other know that you see each other. I think the misconception that we're alone in this, I always thought, oh, I'm alone, you know, that loneliness is what makes us feel so separate and different. But I like to look at it, I don't know if you're Fifth Element movie fan, think of it as having a multipass. Like I have a multipass. I can talk to all different types of people. I can traverse all these different spaces. And instead of thinking I don't belong anymore, it's like, look at all these wonderful opportunities and things I've been able to do because I didn't like fit some hard mold of something. I used to think of it as like a negative and be like, oh, I don't belong. But now I'm like, would I want it to have belonged there? Like, ooh, no. Like, I don't want to fit in there. But it's even like I found it like I've been reading cards for a really long time. I started reading in 95, but professionally full time since 2009. One of my favorite things about working, I used to work out of this bookstore in Venice, was because I didn't fit like the norm of what they thought a reader should look like at the time. Many different people would come to me because they felt like they could be seen. So maybe there's that gift of being seen, like instead of, you know, it's not just about you not fitting in, but like maybe you can give someone the gift of being seen And that starts a ripple effect as well. Because I've had all different people. I had a woman who was houseless come and give me all her change, trying to give me all her change for reading. I was like, I am not taking your money. I don't know if you remember that. Like, seeing friends here from that time. And then I had a preacher come, and he was like, I just wanted to see what it was about. It wasn't judgmental. And I thought, wow, okay, like you came to me because you felt like I could hold that space for you. So it is like just a slight perspective shift. But there's definitely stuff also, like I say in the book, like where imposter syndrome's a big thing, or not feeling like you can be loud or take up space. And as annoying as this is going to sound, it's literally just like practice allowing yourself to fully be present and not float away. So, yes.
Could you talk a little bit more about, like, you're talking about creating boundaries, like protection and those spaces where things can come through, and yet you're also inviting in spirits that may have been abusive and things like that because of the lineage connection. So what about lineage connection to abusive relatives?
Yeah.
That you feel a kinship to in a certain way? Is it important to? Because I love talking about this.
Yeah.
People have said banish, people have said cut the cords, but also they are a part of me, they're part of the lineage.
I think it's discernment and boundaries,
Yeah.
right? You're allowed to kick people out of your house, right? Like, it would be like in the sense of like doing your spiritual protections, right? Say your ancestor altar, putting a bowl of salt out for like a boundary. One of the things I do mention in here was like my relationship where I had to like set new boundaries with some of them because they were taking up too much space and demanding and like suddenly pushing me around. And I deconstructed my ancestor altar. I said, I love you, but we're going to work with you on my time. I'm living. I have to live my life. And I'm happy to help you, but I need to help you in a way that actually is it's like when people would come to me for a reading and be like, I need a reading. And like crisis, I'd be like, do you want a reading? Like, do you want an actual reading in a whole, like helpful setting? Or do you want a reading right now? Because there's a difference. So it's about setting up parameters, I think, that are healthy and balanced for you, and also having discernment and saying, actually, I don't need to work with you. You need to take a step back. And when we can approach each other with reverence, it's like having human, living relationships in a very similar way. At least what I've found. Otherwise, it becomes very because I had found that I was for a little while, I was so obsessed that I was almost allowing myself to abandon myself and using them as a crutch and not living. And I was like, I need to live my life. I can't be in this world all the time. Otherwise, I would have been a nun. I should have gone into a covenant or something, But that's not why I'm here. So, yeah, doing your spiritual protections, your spiritual hygiene, I think that's a huge key thing that could be helpful. Sure. Yes.
I absolutely love the story about the dragon, and maybe also just coming into a relationship with anger, how we carry it.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful to maybe, if you can talk a little more to that about we live in this love and gaslight world.
Yeah.
That actually coming into a relationship with your anger and ways to do that, I'd love to hear about.
I mean, it's a constant exercise. I think when you're naturally, it's interesting too, because then I also found out he was an Aries, and I was like, oh yeah, he was fiery. I have I have an Aries stellium, so I was like, oh my God, there's so much fire. There's so much, the immediate, the first emotion is, and you burn yourself so much, right? I think anger is a powerful tool. And it's literally learning to find the right medium for it. But it is practice. it's such, like I think of like fire eaters and fire dancers when I think of anger, like them learning how to work with it and gracefully dance with it and allow it to like motivate you but not consume you. And that takes practice. And you're not always going to get it right. And that's okay. You just try, but like again and again, and you don't give up on it. Because I think anger is a driving force. Again, but it's like everything. Every emotion is valid and every experience, just like we celebrate birth, but then we get afraid of death. I'm like, no, we need to like, all of these things are part of a full-bodied existence. But yeah, I don't know, therapy really has helped me, but not just therapy. Like I need therapy, I need movement, I need, I need to shoot things. Whether it's with my bow and arrow or go out to a desert. I need to do things that help me like channel it into go, okay, I needed to get past the anger and then go, what do I do next? So that's the other thing is like taking the moment to go, what's on the other side of this? How can I use this energy? Just like we can take anxiety and turn it into curiosity and excitement. I think we can do the similar thing with anger. Where are we? Like, I could, if anyone has any more questions, or I could read maybe a story about initiation. This one's a little more supernatural.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. This one's like inspired by a tattoo I got in New York, but it's called Butterfly Maiden. Okay. Let's see. And also, there are some stories in here that I looked at. I'm like, you'll probably figure out which ones they are, but like I changed the name, but they are about me, but I changed the name. Okay. As a child, Stella could sniff out trouble more quickly than anyone she knew. In reality, she had a highly developed intuitive ability to quickly assess the world around her, identifying potential dangers with frightening accuracy. It made the adults around her very uncomfortable. Not only that, but she also had a vivid fantasy life. She wove her words and drawings into stories about a world which there was endless possibilities. This kind of optimism seemed to her guardians fundamentally suspect. With any mention of this other world, she would be quickly reprimanded. She was punished for seeing the truth, punished for imagining a world in which things could be improved. It wasn't fair. Stella often wondered if this existence would ever make sense, or if she was just born to be sad. And she was often sad. Obsessed with death, even spending time replaying the circumstances of her own demise over and over and again in her head. Would anyone care? Would the adults feel remorse? Would there be anyone to miss her? Her profound sadness followed her throughout her whole life, often creeping out to drag her down and simultaneously piss off relatives, acquaintances, and friends. The thing was, when she wasn't mired in depression, her natural disposition was bright, fearless, creative, and brave. When encouraged and supported, Stella could create the most imaginative inner world full of wonder and enthusiasm. However, the turbulent environment she grew up in, filled with verbal abuse, led to low self-esteem and a desperate need for approval. And as she grew older, the only respite for these feelings came through her ability to express herself. Excuse me. Her need for creative freedom. I need water. Maybe I can't read. Like maybe you should read.
Well, here we go.
Will you give it a go?
Yes.
Okay. Start there. I'm sorry.
The thing was, when she wasn't mired in depression, her natural disposition was bright, fearless, creative, and brave. When encouraged and supported, Stella could create the most imaginative inner world full of wonder and enthusiasm. However, her turbulent environment that she grew up in, filled with verbal abuse, led to low self-esteem and a desperate need for approval. And as she grew older, the only respite that for her feelings came through her ability to express herself. Her need for creative freedom extended to her physical appearance. It seemed that destiny didn't so much call her, but rather dragged her through her life over the years in the same way her astrological natal chart predicted her disposition. It seemed unfair, in her opinion, not only to get the option to rewrite her cosmic architecture, so she tried shape-shifting by altering her appearance through modification from the outside. Some would insist that the frequency in which she changed her appearance had something to do with her mental state, that she was lost and trying to find her identity through tattoos, piercings, and hair dye. This assumption couldn't be further from the truth. Stella often felt like an alien dropped off into this reality, forced to put on a human costume for a lifetime of non-consensual method acting. For all the fiery independence Stella possessed, she was quite vulnerable. She grew up in a place where it wasn't safe to be sensitive. To create a sense of safety, she learned to change her appearance in order to shapeshift from the outside in. It started with her hair. Early on, she learned to lighten it, to be more approachable, and to fit in with the other girls that were her age. When she became a teenager, she needed something more brooding. Dark burgundy or blue-black signaled that she was not sweet or friendly. As she reached young adulthood, she adopted various bright colors, like a venomous snake, to state without words, "I am unpredictable and dangerous if you get too close." And when changing her hair ceased to have the desired effect, she began arming herself with magical protection of talismans. One by one, each tattoo was etched onto her skin as a blood offering, a patchwork of designs all over her body, creating a quilted skin of stories. She often wondered what her memories of the past would be without these images to remind her of where she had been. Could her fate change? Could her destiny be different? The day would come when she learned firsthand that a tattoo could become a doorway and a portal to another world. Stella awoke to the crash of a garbage can hitting the sidewalk and the screeching of metal from a garbage truck. It was typical Brooklyn spring morning, cold and muggy at the same time. The garbage truck began its weekly serenade, picking up each can and slamming it back down with absolutely no awareness or interest in what person, animal, or piece of property was in danger of hitting. It was so early, but the birds had been chirping since 3 a.m. Everything felt loud: the sun, the air, the birds, people, smells, cars, buses, and the subway were all screaming in some melodramatic opera, and it wasn't even 8 a.m. yet. "That's it," Stella shouted as she took one of her pillows in both of her hands, placing it over her face to drown out the sound and maybe smother herself to death. No such luck. She reluctantly dragged herself out of bed to make a pot of coffee and to figure out how to beat the day at its own game. She had time off from the 3 jobs that she needed to make ends meet, so she planned to blow her paycheck on a butterfly tattoo. The idea to do so was sort of a memento mori, meant to remind her that this too would pass, that she would enjoy the moment because death will ultimately come for all of us. After carefully choosing her outfit for the day, she wanted something that screamed, "I will hurt you if you come too close." Stella walked to the subway, but as she descended into the platform below, she quickly realized that something was different. It was always 10 degrees warmer below ground, and the air was musty, nothing new there. So what was it? She wondered as she looked around. There was no sign of anything different, but the energy felt electric. Stella boarded the train. The subway car was packed with normies going to their 9-to-5s, teens on their way to school, and possibly unhoused individuals trying to make their way through the day. Stella got off the train at the first stop in Manhattan and emerged above ground to walk the rest of the way to her destination. She had a ritual of grabbing an empanada from the Venezuelan restaurant and going straight to the Tompkins Square Park to eat and people watch. Killing time there had become a ritual, but today felt different. She still couldn't figure out why. Once she finished her food, Stella headed to the tattoo shop on St. Mark's Place. She never had an appointment, preferring to play it by ear, and that day she met a man who would be helping her out, whom she nicknamed Salty, based on his attitude. She was good at giving people titles. What she didn't know about this guy was that he was actually a warlock, a dedicated practitioner of witchcraft and magic, the kind with a little. Did she know that his tattoo practice was an act of ritual and manifestation, often with immediate and exemplary results? Only a few words were exchanged between them during the 2.5 hours it took to get the tattoo. Salty asked a little about why Stella wanted a butterfly, but he inquired most strangely, asking her to share some keywords about how this symbol made her feel. She thought about it and replied, "I want the butterfly because I want to remember that I am free and that I can be colorful and that beauty is short-lived." As she spoke those words, a feeling came over her, a sense that she wasn't alone, and the electricity she had felt in the subway washed over her entire body. In a way, it was like time had stopped, and at that moment, Salty looked at Stella in the eye for the first time during the entire visit and said, "And so it is." He made a few more adjustments to the details of the tattoo with the tattoo gun and wiped her freshly inked arm down. The air and slight sting woke her from what felt like a trance. The next thing she knew, she was wrapped up and paying for the new ink. As she was making her way out the door, she said, "Thank you, Salty." As she walked away, without missing a beat, he said, "Be careful out there," and he disappeared behind the doorway to the back room. The rest of the day after that was nothing special. Stella grabbed some Chinese food from the takeout place on the corner and headed back home for the day. Before long, she tired enough to go to bed. As her head hit the pillow, she exhaled dramatically and said, "Good riddance to another exhausting day of being a human." That night, Stella had the most beautiful dreams. She felt relaxed for the first time in ages, like she had never felt in her physical body. Her studio apartment was usually drafty and cold unless it was summer, in which it was sweltering hot. Her bed, usually hard as a rock, would cause her to toss and turn throughout the night. And if the bed didn't keep her up, the sounds from the street below would usually wake her up at some point. But that night was different. There was no outside noise or disturbances, only peace and tranquility. Her bed was soft and supportive. The temperature was perfect. Stella was so relaxed that she slept soundly for what felt like 12 hours until she was awoken suddenly by the sharp pain in her abdomen. It felt like she had been stabbed or crushed. She wasn't sure. She tried to let out a scream, but something strange happened. Nothing came out. Throughout the night, she had managed to become so tightly tangled in her bedding that she thought she had accidentally mummified herself in her slumber. As she moved around trying to free herself from her tangled sheets, it became harder and harder to move. There appeared to be no way out, and she couldn't see because the sheets were so tightly wound around her whole body. In a terrifying moment of realization, she knew she was trapped and panicked, and the panic started to set in. Her mind raced, filled with thoughts of dread as she imagined being suffocated in her bed and not being found because she could not get out a call for help. "Don't panic," she thought, trying to reassure herself that she would find a way out of this. But then she felt the pain in her abdomen, which became more and more intense, extending throughout her torso and up her chest and then down through her limbs. She was in excruciating physical pain, but her mind was clear. As Stella tried to rationalize what was happening, the pain worsened. She felt nauseated. She was unable to focus her eyes. Her vision blurred completely, and she could see soft floods of color and vague impressions of what was happening around her. It was so strange, too, because she realized that there was no sound at all at that moment. None of the usual noises, cars, buses, trucks, subway, or people below. She feared that she was, in fact, dead. And this was some type of purgatory that she would be stuck in for eternity. This dizzying experience went on for what felt like hours. Her body felt like it was being pulverized and beaten into liquid form. Overwhelmed, Stella finally resigned herself into exhaustion. As she felt the light fading, a faint vision of Salty, the warlock tattooist, came to her mind's eye. Then everything went black, as if she was in a sensory deprivation chamber. Stella felt the presence of nothing and everything all at once. What felt like hours suddenly became days and weeks as she floated through the void without form. The moment her awareness returned, she was back in the corner of her studio apartment. When she looked around, she realized everything appeared larger than it was before. Her vision, distorted from the pain, made her room stretched and curved as if she was viewing it through a fisheye lens. She moved towards the window to get some air but could not feel her legs. Panicked, she moved without thinking and realized she was fluttering around with the assistance of 2 giant wings extending from her back. As the sun began to peek through the window, she caught a glimpse of her gilded edges. She flew to her makeup dresser, a chest of drawers with a beautiful circular mirror. Moving closer to her reflection, Stella was in disbelief. Where is my reflection, she wondered. Am I a ghost? What she saw in the mirror was a monarch butterfly with giant wings that stretched almost to the ceiling. That's when it clicked. She realized she was the monarch butterfly. Was she dead? Maybe she was drugged with some acid or ayahuasca? Even though she didn't do drugs, Stella felt like maybe that was an explanation for what had just happened. Not a moment later, a breeze came through the window by the dresser, sending her across the room. She was swept up by the breeze, which felt like a hurricane against the current lightness of her body. Buffeted by the breeze, she couldn't quite plant her feet on the floor and spent what felt like days struggling to retain her balance. Weary with the effort of maintaining equilibrium in her new form, she began to understand what was happening. She realized that her time with Salty was a spell, a ritual, a sacrifice, that she created a portal with her words and became her incarnation. She was no longer human, but a manifestation of all that she had declared to desire when Salty tattooed her that day. She was now free, colorful, beautiful, and soon to understand a short-lived life experience. She became the caterpillar when she went to sleep that fateful night after getting the tattoo. As she slept, the sheets wrapped around her, forming a protective chrysalis. The painful metamorphosis of her body followed, and now she had become the beautiful butterfly maiden, just as she had wished. And one of the last generations of monarchs to be born this year, Stella knew that she now had 9 months to appreciate all that was before her, no more, no less. Her final expression of her physical self was the form that she had always wished for, but could not achieve herself. Finally, she was free.
Thank you for taking over the reading. I appreciate it. And oh my goodness. Yeah, so there's liminal spaces everywhere. I would love, before we have like 10 minutes, yeah. I'd love to know about your experience, like with the liminal space and your perceptions of that with all of the work that you do.
So, I'm not really someone who, I don't have like the gift of mediumship and things like that. So for me, a lot of the liminal space would come through hypnosis, would be of the other person being in the liminal space and me kind of being the one that's holding it down on this side. Okay. So I think it's also like a really interesting experience because sometimes people will go to a past life, sometimes they go to an earlier time in this life, sometimes they go to a void space and things come forward symbolically. And then the style of hypnosis I do, we then call in their higher self to answer questions. So it's very interesting that I do feel like I can kind of see what they're describing, even though they're not giving much detail. I feel like I can see like their past life that they're describing or what their higher self is telling them. And so it's interesting for what I do to be kind of here holding the space for someone to be in the liminal. Yeah. And being completely like, it's almost like similar to this, it's almost like a podcast or an interview or a conversation with their higher self. Right. And so and we record it and then they go back and listen, and it's really interesting because you feel very conscious during, but then when you go back and listen to the recording, you're like, oh, I had no idea I talked about that. And then obviously the other liminal space that I'm very connected with is the internet,
Right.
which is my other thing that I do. So that's also weird because it almost feels like a double life at times, because then I'm kind of, JK Ultra on the internet,
Right.
and then in my real life, that's not really like a thing in that same way. So it does feel weird to kind of almost have a separate identity in a liminal space, but it's very like other people experience it more than I do in a way, because they see me as that person more than I see myself as that person. So it's a weird, so those are kind of my two like liminal spaces that I feel like I venture into daily.
Right. You have like JK Ultra, who also knows how to like take a lot of information and find those connection points. And I think that's a beautiful thing that you do within the liminal space, because there's so much out there. But you can take a complex topic or situation and then go, okay, where do these pieces all connect? And then kind of re-gift them to your audience and to the world in a way that people can understand and comprehend, which not a lot of people can do.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I think that that's kind of definitely like my gift, is like distilling information and making
You do it in a way too where you don't make people feel dumb. There's a lot of people that can do that and they make you feel like you're an idiot. You, I think, are really good at making people feel empowered, and even if they had their own, even if it's like new information or it's previous information that they thought they knew, but it's a new perspective, but it doesn't ever, it's always so digestible and tangible without making you feel like an idiot. It makes you feel like, wow, okay, and I'm really learning and taking this in.
Right. So. Yeah. I said I haven't thought about it that way, but I guess, yeah, when I think about it, a lot of times, like, sometimes people that share information are like super pompous, and it's like, right. Ugh, like, like, so no, I do. Right. And it's kind of like sharing excitement around it. Like, yes. I'll get excited about it, and then it like allows other people to be excited. Yeah. Like, oh, aliens, I've been waiting to talk about that too.
Yeah. Apocalypse series. Yes. Relativity. Well, amazing. Thank you again for being my friend and being here tonight and having eyes on the book early on. And thank you all for hanging out and joining us tonight to discuss. I'm going to assign some books up in the back. We're going to get resituated in here and have a look around, check out PRS. The bookstore, gift shop's open. They have lots of different activities. So yeah, thank you all again for being here. Appreciate it. Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, thanks for taking over. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have a coughing fit. I'm going to have a coughing fit.
No, it was great. I needed